Nigeria's economic landscape is a topic that's always on our minds. And just a few days ago, the National Bureau of Statistics offered both a glimmer of hope and some cause for concern. This is as the MBS announced that Nigeria's headline inflation, as you heard from Muplan Dakok, has eased to 21.88% in July 2025, a slight drop from the 22.22% recorded in June. While a decrease in inflation is generally good news, a closer look at the numbers reveals some prices fallen, but others are still climbing. Particularly in our rural areas. To help us break down the numbers and understand what they mean for the average Nigerian, we're joined by a renowned academic and Nigeria's first professor of capital market studies, Nasarawa State University, Professor Uche Uwaleke. You're welcome, Prof.
Thank you so much, Musa, for inviting me.
Okay. We've seen a continuous decline in the inflation figures. What does this signify?
Well, to begin with, it's important to understand that declining inflation rates doesn't mean that prices are coming down. It simply means that prices are rising at a slower rate. Okay, that's what is known as disinflation in economics. Okay. Of course, you also know that the inflation rate is computed from the consumer price index, which tends to capture a number of products or commodities. So in the current basket that we have about 934 commodities under the rebased CPI. It used to be 740. So today we have 934. And what you have out there is simply the average price movement. So just as you rightly noted, some prices are rising at a faster rate. Some others are also coming down. So the average is what you have as the inflation figure. But it's cheering to know that this is on the decline. In other words, prices are rising, at a slower rate. As a matter of fact, since February, I think we've had that, disinflation, such that today we are talking about 21.8%. I recall that the target for the year in the 2025 budget, it's 15%. So at this rate, I think that inflation rate may close the year at, even if we don't hit 15%, but something close to it.
The target was actually 15% for 2025.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said 15%. Yeah. So even if we don't get there, at the rate at which the numbers are coming down, I want to believe that at least we should be.
So, Prof, you're telling us that this might likely continue until the end of the year.
Yes, there is every indication that it will continue. But it's also important to note that, particularly for food, as you also had in that report, food inflation, came down. For food, that can also be likened to the harvest cycle. This is the harvest season. I was actually in the markets on Saturday, to have a feel of the prices, firsthand myself. And I can confirm that the market where I went to, prices of things like potato, yams, local rice, as mentioned, are also down. But interesting in that report, MBS also said that the pressure is more now in the rural areas than in the urban areas. Yeah. So in rural areas you have more, higher food inflation rate than in the urban centers.
But why is that?
Yes, I think it's not difficult to see why. First, you notice that in the urban centers you have more, people supplying items, and that can of course engender competition to ensure that prices remain stable. And the other corollary to that is also the fact that when you have more items, in the markets, the consumer, the buyer, also has a choice. So there is a substitution effect. If the price of foreign rice is rising, a person can switch to local rice. We don't have that option in the rural areas. They don't have, that choice. Mm-hmm. And there's also the transportation issue too. For rural people that go to the urban areas to buy things and bring to sell in the rural communities, of course, we should expect that the high transport cost will impact on the price at which they sell in the villages, in the rural areas. So that, for me, is the major reason for that disparity. And that also, the transport issue, you can also see it even in the state's inflation profile. If you disaggregate inflation rate by states, you see that Borno State, for example, recorded the highest.
The highest, yes.
Yes, highest. Food inflation in Borno, according to National Bureau of Statistics, is as high as 50%. It's over 50%. Okay, whereas the average food inflation rate is around 22, in Borno State is over 50%. Whereas in neighboring Yobe, okay, Yobe is one of the least, Borno is one of the highest. So you can see that contradiction. So that tells you that there's need to actually work on the transport infrastructure, because that to me could account for the neighboring states having that wide disparity. You see, it's difficult to, again, the insecurity is also there. Even if you have bumper harvest in Yobe, to move goods from Yobe to neighboring state Borno, because of insecurity, becomes a problem. Okay, so that's why in this kind of arrangement, there is need, if possible, to also have military and security people ensure that goods are moved from one point A to point B, particularly in neighboring states.
Okay. Now, while year-on-year inflation fell, the month-on-month rate rose to 1.99%. What does this tell us about price pressure?
I think that's with respect to core inflation, because for food, we had that even the month-on-month fell. First, what is year-on-year? Year-on-year means compared to this same period the previous year. That is year-on-year. So in terms of year-on-year, prices rose by 21.8% on the average, compared to July of 2024. That's what it means. And month-on-month means you're comparing to the previous month. Okay, so when you find a situation in which year-on-year is cooling, but month-on-month is rising, it also gives cause for concern, because what it simply means is that the current price momentum, which is what actually counts, is still strong if month-on-month is rising. Okay, so if month-on-month is rising continuously, whereas year-on-year is cooling, it's just a matter of time before year-on-year also begins to rise. So it's important too that attention is paid to that, and I'm pretty sure even the Monetary Authority also pays attention to month-on-month. But there's something I need to mention here, particularly with respect to core inflation. Of course, core inflation is that inflation rate that strips out the seasonal ones, such as food. Food is seasonal, and energy. Energy is also, so core inflation is not having food and energy. They are considered seasonal, so they are more stable. Okay, so when you find core inflation rising, so it gives cause for a concern. But the fact that core inflation, even on year-on-year basis, slowed, okay, for me, also goes to reflect the impact of the relative stability we have had in the exchange rate, because exchange rate has a pass-through, to inflation. So when you have experienced a relatively stable exchange rate, as we have experienced for quite some time now, we are beginning to see the impact of that on core inflation. Core inflation, of course, we're referring to things like the rent, transport, clothing, and so on. These ones that don't have to do with food, as I said, which is seasonal. Part of my opening statement, I told you, part of why food pressure is reducing now is because of the harvest, season. And for that to be sustained, okay, that means we have to have, policies in place that should ensure that, there is also food even outside the, harvest season.
Okay, Prof, it is very important I ask you this question. The report identifies food and non-alcoholic beverages, restaurants and transport as the main contributors to inflation. Given your background as, in capital markets finance, how does this factors impact investment decision and the overall health of the Nigerian capital market?
Yeah, to start with, under the new CPI, the rebate CPI, the weight of food is now 40%. It used to be 50 and it's now 40. Food comes under the classification number 1. But when you now take that alongside the classification number 11, which is restaurants, okay, restaurants is, will capture things like meal away from home. Okay, a restaurant also has 10%, 11% weight. If you add that to the 40%, you also get about 51% weight. So that's why food, continues to be, have that pressure. But overall, of course, investors, take into account the inflation rates and trends in inflation before, making investment. So it's a major factor that is considered by investors generally. Where you have rising inflation, or the expectation is also that prices will continue to rise. Of course, investors tend to pull back. Today, you look at the returns from the market, okay, hovering around 40%, a year-to-date return. And you also look at the inflation rate at 21.8%. It tells you that the returns are positive. So anytime you begin to see inflation rate, rising to the point where it gets above the returns from the market, of course, investors pull back. So inflation is a major factor, in investment decisions, just as interest rates, just as exchange rates. Inflation is one of the 3 prices, mind you. You have inflation, one price, you have exchange rate, second price, you have interest rate. So all these prices are of importance to a typical investor.
Okay, should we expect with what is happening, we likely expect, just as you said, we likely see inflation decrease until December. Then should we expect the Monetary Policy Authority to look at interest rate once again and say, okay, it's time to loosen?
Yeah, as I said, I think the trend will continue, but it may not be to the point where the central bank would want to begin to alter policy at this time. We may not see a reduction in the monetary policy rate, for example, until maybe first quarter of 2026. But I think that this inflation will continue. And the reason we may not see the central bank altering the MPC rate is because of the risks, downside risks to inflation. The risks are still there. A good example is what, of course, the central bank has also complained about, which has to do with the injections that come into the economy every month, by way of FAC. Okay, so that continues to pose a threat to inflation, in the sense that much of that money, as you know, also goes to chase, the scarce forex and putting pressure in the forex market. And whatever happens in the forex market also affects, inflation. So I think this inflation will continue, and that will be on the back of, a number of things the government is doing, maybe I think around the value chain. I think that is what will ensure that, food prices don't go haywire as we had them before. In terms of providing seeds to farmers, in terms of providing fertilizer to farmers, I also think this is a time to also build, invest in storage facilities, because now that we have, a good number in terms of harvest, it's important that post-harvest losses are reduced. And one way to reduce post-harvest losses is also to invest in, storage facilities. And we also pray that the kind of, climate action we saw recently, in Mokwa, for example, the flooding we had there, which also affected food. If you notice, Niger State also was, recorded as having the highest, one of the highest rate of food inflation, and that may not be unconnected with that incident that happened in Mokwa. So we want to believe that going forward, we don't experience, such incidents.
Okay. Professor Uwaleke, it's a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you so much.
Now, on the currency market.